Margaret Quattle was last seen inside her family's Arlington, Texas, residence during the morning hours of October 11, 2001. She was a senior at Sam Houston High School and just weeks away from her 18th birthday. Margaret had aspirations of completing her education and moving forward with her life, but that morning marked the beginning of a troubling mystery. She has never been heard from again. Her adoptive father, Gabriel Emilio Quattle, reported her as a runaway, which was the initial classification of her case. However, by the end of October 2001, authorities changed her status to endangered missing after inconsistencies began to emerge in Gabriel's account of the events surrounding her disappearance. Gabriel claimed that Margaret was abducted by members of the Mexican mafia and sold into prostitution. According to his version of events, men with shaved heads arrived at his home on Port Phillip Drive in Arlington, Texas, and demanded ransom money in exchange for Margaret's release. He described an ominous encounter where these men allegedly made it clear that they would harm Margaret if he did not comply. Despite Gabriel's insistence on this story, investigators were skeptical from the start. They believed his version of events was fabricated and began to focus their attention on him as a potential suspect. Further suspicion was cast on Gabriel when he claimed to have received several emails from Margaret after her disappearance. He stated that these messages were sent from Mexico between October 2001 and February 2002, with one of them even including a photograph of Margaret and another girl posing in front of a church in Mexico. The photo was meant to prove that Margaret was alive and out of the country, but upon closer examination, authorities determined that the image was fraudulent. The emails, which Gabriel claimed were direct communications from his missing daughter, were traced back to his office computer at Chase Bank, where he worked as a fraud investigator. This discovery significantly weakened his credibility and pointed to the possibility that Gabriel was orchestrating an elaborate cover-up. In April 2002, Gabriel was arrested on suspicion of abducting his daughter. He was released on bail shortly thereafter, but the investigation into his role in Margaret's disappearance intensified. Around this time, Margaret's uncle came forward with a 2001 videotaped statement made by Margaret, in which she accused Gabriel of physical and emotional abuse. The tape raised further concerns about Margaret's safety and the environment she had been living in prior to her disappearance. Gabriel dismissed the allegations, claiming that his daughter had fabricated the accusations. He continued to assert his innocence and maintained that he had nothing to do with Margaret's disappearance. Gabriel even claimed that he had recorded phone conversations with Margaret after October 2001 and had handed those recordings over to the authorities. Investigators, however, denied ever receiving any such tapes, further complicating his story. In June 2002, authorities arrested Gabriel again, this time charging him with evidence tampering and fraud. The fraud charges were unrelated to Margaret's case and stemmed from allegations of embezzlement at Chase Bank. Gabriel's wife, Janette Quattle, stood by her husband during this time, expressing unwavering support for him. She stated that she never believed her husband had any involvement in Margaret's disappearance, insisting that the accusations against him were unfounded. Margaret's older brother, however, offered a different perspective. He testified that Margaret had confided in him, saying she wanted to run away due to the physical and emotional abuse she suffered at the hands of their father. This testimony further damaged Gabriel's credibility and provided more context to Margaret's troubled life at home. In May 2004, Gabriel was convicted on the embezzlement charges and sentenced to prison. During the sentencing phase of his trial, he pleaded guilty to theft and tampering with evidence, though the kidnapping charge was dropped as part of a plea agreement. Despite his incarceration, the mystery surrounding Margaret's disappearance remained unsolved. Authorities continued to investigate her case, holding on to the hope that new evidence would emerge. In 2006, law enforcement officials conducted a search at Gabriel's former residence, focusing on a concrete patio that had been poured just days after Margaret went missing. They dug beneath the patio, hoping to find her remains, but the search yielded no results. To this day, Margaret Quattle's fate remains unknown, and her case continues to haunt those who knew her. The story is a chilling reminder of how family secrets and unresolved traumas can spiral into tragic, unsolved mysteries. Jane Davis was last seen in Houston, Texas, on April 30th, 1993. She had made plans to travel to Brenham, Texas, approximately 75 miles away, to pick up her 2-year-old son from his grandmother's house. However, Jane never arrived at her destination and has never been heard from again. Her disappearance remains a troubling mystery with multiple layers of complicated family dynamics and unanswered questions. Jane had relocated to Brenham in the late 1980s and initially rented an apartment leased by Amy Davis. In 1990, Jane married Amy's son, Stephen Clay Davis. The couple eventually moved to Houston, where Jane gave birth to their son in October of that year. However, their relationship quickly deteriorated, and by September 12, 1991, Jane and Stephen had separated. According to Amy, Jane had left Stephen for another man. Despite the separation, Jane continued to focus on her son's well-being. On October 24, 1991, a judge granted Jane sole custody of their son, with Stephen receiving visitation rights and being ordered to pay child support. However, just a week later, on October 31st, Stephen went to Jane's apartment in Houston and allegedly sexually assaulted her at gunpoint. He was subsequently charged with felony sexual assault. Although released on bail pending his trial, Stephen was arrested again in 1992 on a drug charge. He later pleaded guilty to the drug charge and no contest to the sexual assault charge, receiving a 10-year prison sentence. He began serving his sentence in March 1993, just weeks before Jane vanished. Despite the horrific assault, Jane allowed Stephen's relatives to continue visiting her son. Jane's mother had given her a $200 check shortly before her disappearance, intended to help cover the costs of traveling to Brenham and returning to Houston with her child. However, the check was never cashed, raising concerns that Jane never made it to her destination. On the day of her disappearance, Jane reportedly asked Amy's office manager to pass along a message to John Allen Davis, Stephen's brother. She requested that John come to Houston to pick her up and drive her to Brenham, since her vehicle was not functional at the time. John, however, claimed that he neither spoke to Jane that day nor agreed to give her a ride. He also stated that he had been on a business trip in Austin, Texas, approximately 200 miles away, at the time of her disappearance. The last confirmed contact Jane had was with Amy's office manager, making her the final known person to speak with Jane before she vanished. Given that Jane's car was broken down, her reliance on others for transportation made it challenging to determine whether she ever left the Houston area that day. Many of Jane's loved ones have emphasized that she was deeply devoted to her son and would never have willingly abandoned him. Despite this, Amy Davis took custody of the boy after Jane disappeared. When the child grew older, Amy reportedly told him that his mother had abandoned him because she needed a break. This statement contradicted the strong belief held by Jane's family and friends that she would never have willingly left her son behind. Police interviewed Stephen while he was in prison, but he denied any knowledge of Jane's disappearance. He claimed that even if he did know something, he would not share that information with authorities. After his release from prison in October 2002, Stephen relocated to Honduras, where Amy had also moved at some point after Jane's disappearance. Stephen was killed in a car accident just a few weeks after his arrival in Honduras, in November 2002. Investigators have long suspected that Jane was murdered, and one theory is that her body may have been buried on Amy's property on Doe Run Creek Lane in Brenham. In 1997, Amy gave police permission to search the property. However, complications arose when it was revealed that Amy had previously transferred the deed to the property to Stephen and John, who subsequently refused to allow any searches. The Davis family has consistently maintained that Jane left of her own volition, potentially with a boyfriend. However, even Amy has admitted that Jane never showed any indication that she intended to abandon her son. Despite various leads and theories, there has been no concrete evidence of Jane's whereabouts since April 1993. Her case remains unsolved, with both the Houston and Brenham police departments continuing to investigate. Joseph Daggett was last seen in Pecos, Texas, on March 1, 1988. That evening, he left his girlfriend's home in Fort Stockton between 10:30 and 11 p.m., intending to return to his grandmother's home, where he lived. However, he never arrived, and no one has heard from him since. His mysterious disappearance immediately raised concerns among his loved ones, but any trace of Daggett himself was elusive. Authorities later discovered his pickup truck abandoned in the long-term parking lot at Midland International Airport. The vehicle was still loaded with feed, a detail that perplexed investigators, suggesting he had no plans to leave his obligations behind. Additionally, it was believed that Daggett may have been carrying a Morgan silver dollar money clip at the time he vanished. For many years, the case remained cold, with investigators searching for any clues to unravel what might have happened to Daggett that night. Despite various efforts, including searches conducted for his body in 2008, law enforcement found no evidence to bring closure to his case. Then, in 2009, a break in the investigation came when police arrested a man named Lightsey Nathan Saul in New Mexico. Saul was charged with conspiracy to commit capital murder in connection to Daggett's disappearance. Following Saul's arrest, two other individuals, George McIntyre and Robert Ezell, were also indicted on the same charges. Investigators believe that Saul had a personal motive to orchestrate Daggett's murder. According to their theory, Saul suspected that Daggett was having an affair with his wife, a suspicion that allegedly drove him to ask an acquaintance to kill Daggett. A photograph of Saul was released alongside information about his arrest to help the public understand the possible motive behind the crime. The investigation painted a chilling picture of jealousy and betrayal, with Saul's actions leading to devastating consequences. In November 2011, after several years of legal proceedings, Saul was found guilty of his charges and sentenced to 60 years in prison. His conviction marked a significant development in the case, but questions still lingered. While Saul's role in the crime was clear to the court, no one has ever been charged with physically causing Daggett's death. The charges against McIntyre and Ezell remain pending, adding another layer of mystery to an already complex case. Despite Saul's conviction, Daggett's remains have never been found. Foul play is heavily suspected in his disappearance, and investigators continue to believe that Daggett met with a tragic fate due to the circumstances surrounding his case. Joshua J. Vaughn Davis was last seen in the kitchen area of his family's mobile home in the 2600 block of Savannah Hills Circle in New Braunfels, Texas, between 8 o'clock and 8:20 p.m. on February 4, 2011. He lived with his parents and his older brother, and his mother was 8 months pregnant with a boy. His parents were hosting a party that night, and there were 9 people in the house, including Joshua. He disappeared sometime before 9 p.m. and has never been heard from again. Joshua is described as a very mobile toddler, and the front door to his home didn't latch properly. Authorities initially believed he had wandered away. They conducted an extensive search of the neighborhood, but they found no sign of him, and tracker dogs couldn't pick up his scent. If he had been without shelter, he couldn't have survived long. The night he disappeared, temperatures dropped to 19 degrees Fahrenheit because they were unable to find Joshua in the local area. Investigators began to look into other possible causes of his disappearance. His parents said they believed he had been abducted and suggested a family friend as a possible suspect. The friend had visited the mobile home on the night of February 4th and left shortly before Joshua was discovered missing. He reportedly gave conflicting stories about that night and refused to take a polygraph test. Authorities stated the evidence shows Joshua was possibly injured and then removed from the home before he was reported missing. They believe one or more of the adults in the house that night is lying or knows more than they have disclosed about the child's disappearance, but no one has been named as a suspect. Police stated they had been able to confirm that Joshua was missing for 45 to 60 minutes before 911 was called, and that in the meantime, there was a family meeting and illegal drugs were removed from the scene and disposed of. Joshua's mother stated there was only a 10-minute delay in calling 911, and that time was spent looking for Joshua outside. The circumstances of Joshua's disappearance are unclear, and his parents maintain their innocence in his case and have alleged the police did not do enough to try to find their son. His case remains unsolved. Amira Dedrick's story is one that leaves behind a trail of heartbreak, unanswered questions, and a mother's desperate search for her child. Amira was born in Houston, Texas, to Tiara McWilliams and a man whose name has never been publicly released. Not long after Amira's birth, McWilliams left Texas and moved to Wisconsin, taking her infant daughter with her. She said she was fleeing an abusive relationship and feared for her safety. According to McWilliams, Amira's father threatened her, saying she would pay for taking the child away. For a few years, life in Wisconsin was peaceful. Amira grew up in a new environment, far from the chaos her mother had tried to leave behind. But in 2013, Amira's father reached out with a request. He wanted his daughter to spend the summer with him in Houston. Despite her concerns, McWilliams agreed, wanting to give her daughter the chance to know her father. That decision would change everything. Amira left Wisconsin that summer, and when the vacation was over, her father refused to return her. McWilliams made phone calls, pleaded with him to send Amira back, but he wouldn't budge. In spring 2014, she made the difficult decision to travel to Houston herself, determined to bring her daughter home. When she arrived, however, Amira's father wouldn't let her take Amira. He wouldn't even allow her to be alone with her child. Desperate, McWilliams sought help from law enforcement. But because there was no formal custody agreement, the police couldn't intervene. With no other options, McWilliams returned to Wisconsin, without her daughter. After that trip, contact between Amira and her mother became almost non-existent. Amira's father and his girlfriend cut McWilliams off completely, refusing to let her speak to Amira on the phone or through any other means. The silence stretched on for years. Then, in spring 2017, McWilliams received a chilling piece of news. Amira's father had been incarcerated for several months. But when she tried to find out where Amira was, no one had any answers. The last time anyone could recall seeing Amira was in the fall of 2016, before her father's arrest. Alarmed, McWilliams filed a missing persons report. Amira was 8 years old by then. The case was assigned to both the Houston Police Department and the Waco Police Department. When authorities questioned Amira's father about her whereabouts, he gave them a story that only deepened the mystery. He claimed he had given Amira to a woman named Tootie or Linda. He described her as someone who may have lived at the Bordeaux apartments in Waco, Texas, and possibly worked in the healthcare field. Investigators followed up on this lead, visiting the address Amira's father provided. But they hit a dead end. No one by those names lived at that address, and no one there had any knowledge of Amira. For months, authorities tried to piece together what had happened. Meanwhile, McWilliams waited for answers, growing more and more fearful that something terrible had happened to her daughter. The idea that Amira had simply vanished didn't make sense. Someone had to know where she was. Amira's father has since been released from prison, but he remains tight-lipped. He hasn't provided any additional information about where his daughter might be. He has offered no updates on who Tootie or Linda might be, or why he allegedly gave Amira to this person. McWilliams, meanwhile, believes the worst. She fears that her daughter is dead, but she continues to hold on to hope. In her heart, she wants to believe that Amira is still out there, alive, somewhere. The uncertainty weighs heavily on her, and the lack of answers only deepens her pain. The case remains open, with both Houston and Waco police actively investigating. For now, the question remains, where is Amira Dedrick? And what really happened to her after that summer in 2013? Photos of the parents are unavailable in this case in 2013. Mark Randall Davis was last seen at his family's home in Tyler, Texas, on January 15, 2007. At the time of his disappearance, Mark was a senior at Texas A&M University in College Station. He was home for winter break and was supposed to head back to campus the next day. The night before he vanished, Mark had gone out to buy a new jacket to take back to school with him. His family recalls that he seemed normal that evening, and after he returned from the store, everyone went to bed like usual. But when his parents woke up the next morning, Mark was gone. It's believed that Mark left the house around dawn, taking his mountain bike with him. His bike was a metallic forest green and silver, 26-inch frame, 24 gear, 2005 Expedition Specialized mountain bike. A photo of a similar bike is often shared with his case summary. However, that bike and Mark have never been seen again. There were a few reported sightings of him in the Tyler area in the days following his disappearance, but none of them were confirmed. Mark was a smart, hardworking student. He had a high GPA and was pursuing a dual major in chemical engineering and economics before he abruptly switched his focus to Spanish. He was fluent in the language and had plans to study abroad in a Spanish-speaking country. But his behavior took a concerning turn in the months leading up to his disappearance. After Thanksgiving in 2006, Mark stopped attending most of his classes, except for Spanish, which he continued to excel in and even earned an A. His parents had noticed he seemed withdrawn and unsure of his future, which worried them deeply. Mark had attended Tyler Junior College before transferring to Texas A&M, where he lived in a dorm-style apartment at the Callaway Villas in College Station. He had 3 roommates, but wasn't particularly close to any of them. His parents said he didn't go out much, wasn't involved in extracurricular activities, and, as far as they knew, didn't have a girlfriend. In the weeks before his disappearance, Mark's parents became more concerned about his mental state. He seemed unusually quiet and distant, and he was clearly struggling to figure out what he wanted from life. They took him to see a therapist, hoping it would help. However, the therapist didn't see any major red flags and believed that Mark would eventually work through his issues. When Mark vanished, he left behind a note for his parents. The note said that he loved them, that his decision to leave wasn't anyone's fault, and that they shouldn't expect to see him again. It was a heartbreaking message, and his parents were left devastated. They initially thought he may have traveled to a Latin American country, considering his fluency in Spanish and his interest in the culture. But there was one problem. Mark's passport was left behind, along with his cell phone, wallet, car keys, and money. His passport has since expired and has never been renewed. His driver's license was also left behind, but authorities believe he may have obtained a Texas state identification card. The question of what happened to Mark has haunted his family ever since. Did he leave intentionally to start a new life? Or did something happen to him? Law enforcement isn't sure whether he's still alive or if he met with foul play, but his parents hold out hope that he might still be out there somewhere. They believe it's possible that Mark is living quietly in the College Station area, perhaps working odd jobs as a Spanish tutor or a short-order cook to get by. Mark's parents have made it clear that if he doesn't want to return home, they can accept that. They only want to know that he's alive and safe. For now, though, Mark Randall Davis remains missing, and his case remains unsolved. Janette Dufault was last seen on September 13, 1982, in Odessa, Texas, where she was employed at the Doll's House, a club located on Andrews Highway. At the time, Janette had been working as a waitress, although she had previously been a dancer at the club. On the night of her disappearance, she went to the Doll's House to discuss a work-related matter. While at the club, she had one alcoholic drink before leaving, telling her colleagues that she needed to go home to her daughter. This was the last time anyone heard from her. A week later, her pickup truck was found abandoned on the south side of Odessa, far from the Doll's House, which was located on the north side of the city. The truck was eventually towed to the home where Janette had lived with her husband, but despite an extensive search and investigation, no further clues about her whereabouts have been found. Her disappearance came just days after the birth of her daughter, a fact that added a layer of tragedy to the mystery surrounding her case. Authorities suspect foul play in Janette's disappearance, but with little evidence to go on, the case remains unsolved. Pauline Diaz was last seen on December 7, 2010, after finishing her shift at the H-E-B grocery store located at Southeast Military Drive and Goliad Road in San Antonio, Texas. Surveillance footage from the store captured her speaking with another woman near her white 2010 Toyota Tacoma pickup truck before she left. Pauline was supposed to go to the home of her estranged husband, Pedro Pete Ruiz, that day to pick up a lawnmower. Ruiz confirmed that he did see her that day, but the circumstances surrounding her disappearance remain unclear. The two were in the midst of a divorce, and their relationship had become strained. On several occasions prior to her disappearance, Ruiz had reportedly caused disturbances at the H-E-B where Pauline worked, prompting store staff to escort him out after confrontations with her. A few days after she vanished, Pauline's white Toyota Tacoma was found abandoned on Highway 181 and FM 320, not far from Ruiz's residence. Her purse was still inside the truck, but there was no sign of her at the scene. The discovery raised immediate concerns for her safety, and a photo of the truck has been shared widely in connection with her missing person case. Investigators searched the area, but no additional evidence was found at the time. Pauline's family, desperate for answers, hired a private investigator to assist with the case. The private investigator believes that Pauline may have returned home after visiting Ruiz's house and that something unexpected happened once she got there. One of the most puzzling pieces of evidence is that the shoes she was wearing on the day she disappeared were later found inside her home, with sand stuck to them that was similar to the sand found at Ruiz's property. Additionally, some of her clothes were found scattered on the floor inside her house, which her family described as highly unusual. Pauline was known for her meticulous housekeeping, and it was completely out of character for her to leave things out of place. Investigators have expressed doubt that Pauline left of her own accord. Ruiz has been a person of interest in the case for years due to his behavior both before and after her disappearance. Just days after Pauline went missing, Ruiz made inquiries about her life insurance policy and became upset upon learning that he was not the beneficiary. Despite this suspicious behavior and his troubled history with Pauline, Ruiz has never been charged in connection with her disappearance. He continues to maintain his innocence and denies any involvement in her case. In 2018, investigators conducted a search at a property in Floresville, Texas, that Ruiz and Pauline had previously shared. Police dug for her remains, hoping to uncover new evidence that would help solve the case. However, the search yielded no results, and the mystery of what happened to Pauline remains unsolved. Jacob Dubois's disappearance is a case that carries chilling details and haunting unanswered questions. The 22-year-old was last seen leaving his home in the 5100 block of Brookline in Schertz, Texas, late at night on March 7, 2021. He had told his girlfriend he was heading out to meet a friend, Ethan Carl Beckman. That meeting would be the last confirmed sighting of Jacob, and what followed would leave his family and authorities suspecting foul play. According to Beckman's initial account, he and Jacob met up as planned and eventually parted ways near a construction site close to Homestead Parkway in Somerville. Beckman claimed Jacob told him he was going to walk home from there. However, Jacob never made it back, and despite numerous searches, he has never been heard from again. From the beginning, Beckman's version of events raised suspicions. His story shifted multiple times, making it difficult for investigators to pin down exactly what happened the night Jacob vanished. But it wasn't just his inconsistent statements that set off alarm bells. It was his actions in the hours and days after Jacob disappeared. On March 8th, the very next day, Beckman made several trips to Walmart. Surveillance footage captured him buying items like bleach, lighter fluid, and paper towels, supplies that could be used to clean up or dispose of evidence. The timing of these purchases was suspicious, given Jacob's sudden and unexplained disappearance. Things took an even darker turn on March 9th. In the early morning hours, Beckman's gray 2019 Volkswagen Jetta GTI broke down near US 281 and Borgfeld Drive. A police officer who stopped to help noted that Beckman's clothes were stained with bleach, and inside the car were items like lighter fluid and paper towels, the same supplies Beckman had purchased at Walmart. The officer's observations were significant. Combined with Beckman's conflicting statements, they prompted authorities to take a closer look at his vehicle. On March 11th, police seized the Jetta and processed it for evidence. What they found inside painted a grim picture. The car had been recently cleaned, so much so that the floorboard was still wet when investigators began their search. But despite the apparent attempt to scrub it clean, they found traces of blood in and around the passenger seat. Even more disturbing was the discovery of a spent bullet lodged in the passenger seat pillar. These findings suggested something violent had occurred in that car. As investigators dug deeper, they discovered that Beckman had been trying to sell the vehicle. He even discussed having it crushed with a potential buyer. This detail raised serious questions about Beckman's intentions. Was he trying to destroy evidence? On March 19th, less than 2 weeks after Jacob's disappearance, Beckman was arrested and charged with tampering with or fabricating physical evidence. A mugshot of him is included in public records, marking the moment he became a central figure in the investigation. Despite the damning circumstantial evidence, Beckman has not been charged with murder or any other crime directly related to Jacob's disappearance. The case against him, while suspicious, lacked enough concrete evidence to secure those charges. For Jacob's family, the arrest was both a step forward and a painful reminder of how far they still had to go. They had been hoping for answers, for any clue that might lead them to Jacob or at least explain what had happened to him. Instead, they were left with more questions. Authorities have since classified Jacob's case as a homicide investigation, though his body has never been found. His family continues to search for him and for the truth behind what really happened on that fateful night in March 2021. Ethan Beckman remains a key figure in the case, but without further evidence, authorities have been unable to bring more serious charges against him. What happened to Jacob Dubois that night? Caitlyn Dennison, a resident of Reno, Nevada, vanished under mysterious circumstances in early 2018 after traveling to Texas with a man she had met 6 months prior. In 2017, Caitlyn encountered the man in Reno and developed some form of relationship with him, though she withheld crucial details about him from her family. She never disclosed his name, appearance, or much about their connection. On January 9, 2018, Caitlyn boarded a flight with this man to Midland, Texas. Before her departure, she made a chilling remark to her sister, saying, "This guy makes me scared for my life," a statement that would later haunt her loved ones as they searched for answers about her fate. The last known contact Caitlyn had with her family was on January 10th, the day after her arrival in Texas. That day, she placed a phone call to a relative while at a Walmart store in Midland. Investigators believe that after her trip to Walmart, Caitlyn and the man she was traveling with went to a Domino's pizza restaurant on Linda Avenue in Odessa, Texas, and later visited Rick's Cabaret in search of employment opportunities for her. There is speculation that Caitlyn may have spent that night with a man inside his RV. This is the last trace of Caitlyn before she disappeared without a trace. The man Caitlyn traveled with has since been identified and questioned by law enforcement. He was a truck driver who worked in the oil industry, operating in the Permian Basin region of Texas. Although he cooperated with the investigation and was questioned by Nevada police, authorities have not publicly disclosed whether he is considered a suspect in Caitlyn's disappearance. He is no longer residing in the Midland area, but questions about his involvement in her case persist. Caitlyn's family remains deeply concerned for her safety. Her cryptic warning to her sister before she left Nevada, along with her sudden and unexplained disappearance, has led them to fear the worst. Rebecca Dian Demery was last seen in southeast Odessa, Texas, in the early morning hours of March 1, 2023. A resident of Seminole, Texas, she had traveled to Odessa to visit a sick relative. On the day she vanished, Demery experienced a medical emergency that required her to be transported to the hospital by ambulance. After receiving treatment, she was discharged and informed her family that she planned to walk back to her car, a Dodge Durango, which she had left at her hotel due to mechanical issues. However, she never made it to the vehicle and has not been heard from since. Surveillance footage from the area captured a man assisting Demery as she got into his white Chevrolet work truck. Authorities were able to identify the man and confirmed with his employer that he was the only person who drove the truck that day. According to the man, he and Demery had been communicating through a dating app. He claimed she told him she needed a ride and had nowhere to stay, so he offered to help. He stated that he eventually dropped her off at an unspecified location near Moss Avenue in West Odessa. As the investigation progressed, the man stopped cooperating with police, raising further suspicions about his involvement in Demery's disappearance. Although law enforcement has not publicly released his name, they confirmed that he is a person of interest in the case. A search of his work truck and home yielded concerning findings. Possible bodily fluids were detected in the back seat of the truck, and traces of what appeared to be blood were found in the cab. Demery's family insists that she would never willingly abandon them or vanish without a trace. Since her disappearance, her phone and credit cards have remained unused, deepening concerns about her safety. Her loved ones continue to hold out hope for answers, but despite ongoing efforts by law enforcement, Rebecca Dian Demery's case remains unsolved.